I'm Phil Rickaby, and I've been a writer and performer for almost 30 years. But I've realized that I don't really know as much as I should about the theatre scene outside of my particular Toronto bubble. Now, I'm on a quest to learn as much as I can about the theatre scene across Canada. So join me as I talk with mainstream theatre creators you may have heard of and indie artists you really should know, as we find out just what it takes to be stage-worthy. If you value the work that I do on Stageworthy, please consider leaving a donation either as a one-time thing or on a recurring monthly basis. Stageworthy is created entirely by me, and I give it to you free of charge with no advertising or other sponsored messages. Your continuing support helps me to cover the cost of producing and distributing the show. Just 4 people donating $5 a month would help me cover the cost of podcast hosting alone. Help me continue to bring you this podcast. You can find a link to donate in the show notes, which you can find in your podcast app or at the website at stageworthy.ca. Now, on to the show. Glenn Sumi is a Toronto-based arts writer and editor specializing in theatre. He was a writer at Toronto's Now magazine covering theatre, comedy, and film for 25 years. Recently, he launched his own theatre website, So Sumi, where he reviews and writes about Toronto theatre. In this conversation, we talk about what drew him to reviewing theatre, his early days at Now, the Toronto theatre scene in general, and much more. Here's our conversation. The best place for us to start would just simply be what is it that drew you to reviewing?
Wow. I know, I've been doing it for so long. I've always had a lot of opinions, and I remember like even in high school, people just saying, you have too many opinions. Almost like it was a bad thing. And I think when I figured out that you could actually people made a living doing it. Like, it took me a while. I just didn't really, you don't really understand how the world works and what real jobs are. I was reading the Toronto Star, and it was like the TV critic, I think, Jim Bodden. And I just thought, wow, this is his job. This is what he does for a living. Like, I love watching TV. I love watching movies. So that was always in the back of my head. And then, I guess when I went to university, I went to U of T, started writing for the student newspaper, and just thought, I guess this is how you do it. They had a bunch of like people out in the real world who would come talk to us and tell us what, their jobs were like. And I thought, oh, you know what? This sounds really interesting. Like, why not? Like, I love going to plays. I love seeing movies. I love watching TV. And again, I had so many opinions. So, why not see if I could do it? What I didn't realize was that, there really, even back then, and we're talking, like over a couple decades ago, there were a handful of full-time jobs where you could make a decent living doing this. And now, of course, it's just like, you can count the number of jobs, full-time jobs, I guess, for arts critics, probably on one hand in the country.
Yeah.
So I think I worked at the student newspaper, which was great practice. And because it was in Toronto too, I ended up dealing with, a lot of the publicists in theater that I would eventually, deal with when I was so-called professional.
So getting started in that way, having so many opinions and having, at the student newspaper, what took it to the next step? Because, like you said, not everybody gets to take their opinions and have them published. So what took you to the next level out of the newspaper?
Uh, I guess um, I guess I just started freelancing, which is ironic because that's what I'm doing now. So it's like I've come full circle, baby. But I just, was starting out and doing whatever. Like I was writing about anything, not just the arts. Like I was just, trying to pay the bills. So word would get out among my freelance friends that, oh, there's this publication called, what was it called? I think it was called Family Practice Magazine or whatever. And it was a magazine that like family doctors would subscribe to. And that, it was like really, it was like great glossy paper, like tons of pharmaceutical ads and everything. So, and they paid really well. And so, I remember writing a few articles for them, like pitching for them. So it's just like basically anything that could pay in any medium too. I did, radio spots. I did these live radio spots on the CBC show called Real Time. When this must have been like in the late 90s or so, where I would go out to things and just sort of basically report on them, like pretty much live. I think there was a little bit of a delay, but live. And so that was like really, really exciting. I eventually did end up writing for like TV guide like magazines and things. Extra Magazine was one of my first professional gigs. I wrote about books. And then, and after I had been doing that for a while, there was an ad for a theater writer at Now Magazine. So that would have been in 97. And that really changed my life. So
Yeah. Now you were writing about all of these things, and were you also reviewing movies? Did you get to review TV shows? Like what were the early days of your reviewing history like?
No, I mean, as a freelancer, somebody coming, from the outside, you have to realize that most outlets are going to have at least one full-time, critic on those beats. So really, if you were trying to pitch a newspaper you would have to come up with some angle that, that the house critic didn't have. So for instance, what was it? I remember, I think early on I was going to, I found out that there was like a young theater critics conference in Strasbourg, France. So I applied to that while I was still a young theater critic, which was totally fascinating. And you got to see like theater from all over the world, which is one of the things that I do miss about theater in Toronto these days. We really don't get exposed to that much international theater. But I knew that I was going to that. So I lined up, can't remember. I called CBC Radio. And so I did a spot on that for them on this international conference and something else too. I think I did something for one of the dailies, but it had to be sort of something you couldn't just pitch like a review of this, because the house critic would, it would be theirs. So you always had to be thinking of a different way, of a different angle or whatever. I mean, I think things are different now just because so many outlets don't have like perhaps a full-time critic. So, and there's more of an interest in people's experiences. So, if I pitch an editor and say, well, I don't know. I mean, there's this movie, about Maria Callas or something coming up, I think next year. And I know a lot about her. So I would, that would go a long way to me getting it. But back then it was really tough. And I remember too, trying to use whatever, specialties I had and sort of being discouraged by some editors too. I remember one editor said, I can cover LGBTQ, TV shows or films or whatever, and Asian themed things. And he said, you really shouldn't, limit yourself to that. And I
Huh.
thought, oh, interesting. I mean,
Huh.
times have really changed because now, I mean, I've been an editor as well. I mean, I would love that kind
Mm.
of specialty, like somebody bringing that,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's a voice or, an underrepresented voice or
Mm-hmm.
marginalized voice. I would think that would add some sort of authenticity to the section. Whereas back then, or late 90s, early aughts, it was a tougher sell.
Mm.
So,
With now you mentioned having opinions, and it's important for a theater critic to have opinions, but a lot of us have opinions and we don't write them down and publish them. Because I don't think that you can just like write down your opinions. I think there's obviously
right.
more to it. There's analysis, there's things like that. So
Mhm.
how did you learn to go from just having opinions
Mhm.
to really analyzing and laying out like a thesis about a play or a comedy show or anything like that? How did that come about for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's just, it, it's all about seeing as much as possible. Um, I remember too, like my editors, the editors that I had at Now Magazine, they would joke about young writers or new writers, people who hadn't reviewed, um, that much. And they would come in and they would instantly give something like 5 N's. At Now Magazine, we use this N system or
Right.
1 N. So they would be so extreme. And a lot of it was just because they hadn't seen that much. So they really hadn't sort of sifted through,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, dozens, hundreds and hundreds of things. So you really do see, what deserves that 5N. Like I remember giving out some 5N things that I think in retrospect probably didn't deserve them, but they somehow squeaked through. I mean, yeah, it's like Phil, it's one of the hardest things in the world
Yeah.
to, to come up with an argument about, well, first of all, to try to understand what an artist is trying to do, and make it, and you're not writing for the artist necessarily too, but you want to do it justice. You're writing for
Mm-hmm.
readers. You're writing for people who, might go to a show, but to set it up in a interesting way and a lively way so that it's good reading. Um, and, I mean, I remember a science friend said to me, I think he was watching while I was writing a review or going through it or tearing up my hair or something when I still did have hair. He was saying, wow, it is like math or it's like science. Like you have to
Mm.
provide a logical, um, reason or, there's logical thought that goes into this. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just start analyzing things right off the bat, right? Like you have to bring them in a way. You have to, with your lead, and you also, that's your chance of bringing in somebody who might not, I'm talking about, in the days of old real
Mm-hmm.
newspapers. You might attract somebody with, your opening sentence who might not even be interested in theater, who might not think
Right.
about it. So, that's takes a lot of work. And then once you have them, you have to like set up, the premise or, what you think the play is about. And give a bit of synopsis, but not too much. You don't want to give everything away, and then get into some specifics. But they're really, I mean, that makes it sound formulaic, but it's really not. Each piece sort of has a different way, will demand a different sort of approach.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be hard work. And the ones that are really hard are the ones that are right in the middle, are the ones
Right.
where you don't really feel strongly, like you didn't love it, you didn't hate it, but there are some good things and, there's some things that don't quite work. And those are often the hardest ones to write just because you really don't feel strongly about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can you make that sound interesting, like in print, you
Yeah.
know? So often I find myself really struggling with those. And again, really amazing things like fantastic, like, I don't know, something like Robert Lepage's lip sync. Everything works so perfectly that you can't even single things out. Like to do that is not to do it justice. And it's like, sounds mechanical. And this, I mean, this thing just works so organically that you don't even want to analyze the parts. But, again, you have to find some sort of way to talk about it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just as difficult as it was before, but now I think there are sort of tricks, and now I know, okay, if I sit with this for long enough, something will come to me. And of course, I've just seen thousands of things. So I kind of have ways of getting into pieces, but every now and then there will be something that just really stumps me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are reasons, plenty of reasons not for somebody like me not to write reviews. I'm not particularly good at, listen, I can slag a show I don't like, and I think anybody can do it.
Right.
And if you don't like a show, you can find all kinds of things to say about that show. And even like sometimes I'll watch a show and I don't like it. So then I start to try to like, why isn't it working for me? And I'll think about that sort of thing. And so that's in some ways, like you were saying about, a show that's really good. You can leave a show that's really good and just repeat, yeah, so good, so good. But that's not a review, So it's actually harder. And of course, those mediocre shows, the shows in the middle, you don't know what to say about those.
Yeah.
Again, you mentioned seeing thousands upon thousands of shows. And, in the days when you were writing for Now, I assume that the shows were assigned to you between yourself and John Kaplan.
Yeah. I mean, John was really great about that. And he didn't say, "Oh, I want these" or whatever. And then you can take whatever I don't want. We would always it would just go back and forth. Like, what do you feel like saying? Or, and that, I think that's really rare.
Yeah.
And only occasionally, because he did have some really good friends in the theater. And that's a whole other topic. But only occasionally would he say, "Oh, I'm really close to, a couple of people in this cast. Do you mind reviewing that?" It would be fine, of course. Yeah.
See, I think that's the right choice, though. Like I know a bunch of people in this show. I don't feel I can be biased. Somebody else, I can't be unbiased because I know these people. You should do it, and that seems like the ethical choice for reviewing a show.
Yeah, no, that was great. But again, not as often as I thought. So I would say maybe a dozen times in however, in the decades that we worked together. Did he ask that? And it was fine because, ultimately, I mean, he saw more than probably anybody else did in the city.
It's true.
But ultimately I would probably have got around to it anyway. And I do miss those days of working, of working it Now and also having John there, but also having freelancers. So other people could cover shows. And that's one of the things that I've had to sort of adjust to with the blog and the newsletter that I started at, is just having to, I guess, weigh in on everything. Whereas before I didn't have to, it was stupid. I didn't even think about this. I thought, why am I so burnt out? It happened like a couple of months ago. And it's just like, cause I would see the same number of shows, but I wouldn't have to necessarily write about them. Whereas because it's just me here, I kind of have to weigh in. So I think going forward, I may not do that. So I may just choose better or choose what to write about more carefully. But again, who knows? I mean, I do have things to say. I do like supporting these smaller theaters too. So if there's a way, if I can, just maybe not write as long on some of them. But that was a surprise when it sort of kicked in and I thought, oh yes, because I would usually review a couple of things a week, but I would see more and, I would just see them. I would catch up on them, especially if my colleagues had really liked them. And I'd catch them throughout the run. I wouldn't necessarily have to see them on opening week or whatever.
Now that you are writing, you're under your own website,
Mm-hmm.
and there is far too much in this city that's going on for one person to see. How do you make the choice about what it is that you do go to see and what you can't fit into the schedule?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've started, a couple of outlets have asked me to review for them. So I've been doing this freelance stuff. So that is often in the mix. And so even if I've booked something, if, a publication asks me to review, I'll probably change it just so that I can get paid for it. But I do try to see everything. If it's up to, one show and something else and somebody that I trust has seen it, sometimes I'll slip into or slide into their DMs and ask them, hey, is it worth seeing this? You know, uh, but again, I have like a couple of decades of practice doing this. So you find out when the run is, you have little tricks like, when are the matinees? I've even gone into like student matinees sometimes, like during the week. If I had like a weekday, I've asked before, hey, do you think I could go to that? Because nights are precious,
Yeah.
nights, all the shows are on. So, so things like, Saturday matinees and Sunday night sometimes, if shows have that, it's like, ooh, that's pretty rare. But I miss things like, readings and things like sometimes readings are on like a Monday night or something like that. And I really do miss going to comedy. Like I remember, pre-pandemic, I would sometimes like on the weekend, I would go to a play and then like a late night comedy show or something. And then sometimes even a late night film after that. And I think because of the nature of the comedy clubs, they're just so small and I'm still trying to be COVID cautious.
Yeah.
I just haven't gone to them. I've gone to the big ones. And also because, these comedy places exist too by serving drinks and food.
Yeah.
It's just like nobody's masked. I mean, nobody's masked in the theater anyway these days, but I'm pretty much always masked at the theater just cause I go to so many.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to be felled by this thing. But I really do miss comedy. I miss sort of, these packed like sardines into a small comedy club. I miss that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something magical about those spaces, both in this like a small theater space when magic is happening and also in a comedy space where something amazing is just like happening and the audience is like really on fire. And those are like those rare special moments, right?
Yeah.
Now I have to say, and I'm not going to talk about like all of the stuff that happened in Now Magazine, but I want to say that during the period, through the 2020 through to when you started your own blog, on behalf of the theater community, the fact that you were still writing for Now and reviewing meant a lot, and I know that a lot of people who are listening to this right now are nodding their heads because it was very much appreciated that even though all of that stuff was going down, that you were still seeing stuff and writing about it. So thank you for that.
No, thanks. I mean, that, especially last year, after we weren't being paid, and people had been taking sort of volunteer layoff to get, EI. I remember thinking, oh, you know what? I'm going to look at this site as almost as like a personal blog, personal theater blog. Because at that point, like in March 2022, right? Theater started up again. Like it was gradual, but there was a lot to see. So I started, I just thought, I'm not getting paid, but I think I had it in the back of my mind that, eventually I would begin something on my own. I probably should have done it a lot earlier, but this sort of gave me the practice. And I tried out certain ways of covering things like, not having a post per show, but I would round up some things. I'd round up 2 or 3 shows and have one post about that. And it was just a way to get into the rhythm of doing that. So I think it really helped out. But again, Phil, it's not like film where you could, you can catch up when it comes out on Blu-ray or 4K. It's like theater is going to be gone. Like this, after this 10 day run or 3-week run, you're not going to see it again. And if it does come back, if it does do well and somebody remounts, it's not going to be the same. The cast isn't going to be the same energy. The space might even be bigger. So there's always that, because there's just the FOMO of it all, Well, if I miss this, it could be gone forever. So that has sort of been drilled into me. And so I remember thinking, oh, I should see this. I should see this. I should write about it. So I wasn't even really, and we didn't know then that we wouldn't be paid for 6-7 months or so.
Right.
So it was just what I knew. And again, I feel a loyalty to this community. It's like, wow, I followed some of these artists, all their career, like generations. And if you lose that, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, yeah, I mean, I just wanted to continue doing what I was doing just because there was so much else that was changing. And I was so grateful too for live theater to be coming back that I was excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that feeling you describe of like something like once it's closed, it's gone. Like there's so many things that, I've seen that I've tried to describe to somebody and tried to like capture the magic of it for somebody. And all I could say is like, it was pretty amazing. And there's no way that you were ever going to be able to experience this thing, and I've seen so many shows where that's been the case. And I'm glad that I saw them at the time, but you can't, it's the magic of theater and also the thing that I don't think we capitalize enough on. The fact that like, this is an experience that's going to happen now and it's never going to happen again like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. That's why we love it so much, I think. And which is why it's so mysterious too. Like I've often thought, because you're also a different person when you were a different person when you saw that, right? Like, I remember thinking, when Daniel Brooks passed away too, there were some of the first productions of his that I had seen. I remember thinking, wow, I would love to go back and see this thing in 1998 that I saw that totally blew me away. And I can look at my review and that's fine, but it just doesn't capture, just the spirit, the essence of the piece. So yeah, whereas with a film, you can go back. And of course you are different. You're older. You see things that you didn't, but with theater, man, it's gone.
Yeah.
No. And of course, as we all know, like video versions of those plays, like pro shots or whatever, they don't capture that. They can't.
They don't. And I remember, in the thick of COVID, when Disney Plus released their filmed version of Hamilton.
Oh, Hamilton, yeah.
I remember watching that, and it was great to see people close up because when I saw it, I was really far back and all that sort of stuff. But I remember the more distinct thought that I had as I was watching that was, man, I miss being in an audience.
Yeah.
So you could sort of give the sense of what it's like to be there, but sitting in the audience is the unique perspective, not sitting on your couch.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that was a really good, capturing of that show though. So I really liked how they did do that. It's almost like a model for how you could do, a stage show.
Yeah. I mean, they had the budget for it because most of us only get to put like a camera at the back of the theater.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's all we get. And that's a little harder to sell to people, to like, hey, see my live streamed version of this show, and this tiny camera at the back of the room doesn't really sell in the same way as that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you film, like you said, like you can always, when you watch it, it is exactly the same. It's the same film. It's the same performance. It's always that. You can always relive it. And I'm curious because, you've reviewed different things, but you've been reviewing theater for so long. Did you we sort of like skirted around it earlier, but settling on theater as the primary thing that you were going to review, did that happen at now? When did that sort of start to settle for you?
Mostly. Yeah, because I mean, I was hired as a theater writer, and then a couple years later, maybe a year and a half later, they hired me as an editor. I think I was associate editor of the entertainment section, and then a couple years after that, I became the film editor too. But I think what happened, and I had to think about this too when I started the blog. I think what happened was that I realized that there are so many people writing about film, that really, it wasn't, my contribution was just very small, whereas I thought that I could make a bigger contribution to writing about theater. Also, it just, I like it so much more, and it's just so much more honest. And I think that the artist's, intention behind it is honest. Because I remember, especially when I started covering both of them, pretty equally, I remember thinking, oh, because you see sequels in film and everything, and you see, people just trying to make a quick buck, and you just you don't see that in the theater world. I mean, if only, right? I mean, you very rarely, even in commercial theater, I mean, there's the whole jukebox musical trend and everything like that, but that's not the bulk of the kind of theater that you see, like the meat and potato sort of stuff that you see all the time.
Yeah.
But I remember, I think it's just the theater artists, why they're doing it, how they're struggling to do it, just is so inspiring from my perspective. That I thought, oh, this is just such a more interesting and exciting and immediate, art form to be writing about. I'm happy. I mean, the only thing that I really wish I could do more of is see again, more international stuff is, because there's theater happening all over the world, obviously, and not just, in the English, speaking world, not just New York and London or whatever, but everywhere. And so I just wish there was a way to bring in more international stuff. I mean, thankfully, the population of Toronto is so eclectic, and a lot of artists are coming from other countries and are bringing those stories and their techniques to us. And I think that's really one of the most exciting things here. But I just wish more like bigger companies came through, as they used to with some of the festivals. I don't know if you remember the World Stage Festival.
I do.
Yeah. And that was just extraordinary. But again, you need money, you need programming, and those programmers really did have to go all over the world, and see stuff, good enough stuff to bring back here. But yeah, I mean that, and again, because it's not going to exist, you can't see like a tape of this. So, yeah, maybe I will try to make it to more things, internationally, but again, cost, money.
Yeah. I mean, cost is really, everything, theater is, I don't want to say it's changing, it's finding itself, but you hear stories about these theaters in the States that are closing down. You hear theaters, during the pandemic, we lost a couple of independent spaces in Toronto. Money is the difficult and the hardest thing about producing theater, and no matter the scale, whether it's on like a world stage scale or like a little indie theater like the Red Sandcastle, or the Assembly, they're both like, these are, it's hard to find all of that. But also, as we look at the landscape of the theater in Toronto, we've lost a lot of voices that write about theater over the pandemic. And even just before that, because like you mentioned, there aren't many full-time reviewers, for any of the newspapers. Mostly they're freelancers. And that means that there's fewer people who are just writing about it in general. And then you look at something like the Toronto Fringe Festival, and, sadly, Megan Mooney had to stop producing Mooney on Theatre. I remember last year's Fringe, there was like this mad scramble for where are the reviews, where are the reviews, where are the reviews.
Right. Yeah.
It's so, I think we're finding some equilibrium, but are you seeing that as you're sort of continuing on your journey as a writer under your own website, that there's sort of like do you see the ecosystem of people writing about theater becoming more healthy as time goes on a little bit?
I think, yeah, I mean, obviously it's gone digital. So, a lot of the younger critics, have their own blogs, have their own sites. And there's some really exciting writing out there, I think, going on. And there are some training programs too, especially, because, it, in the past couple of decades, it's been a very, white, field. There have been, mostly white critics. And think, I think that is changing. There have been, BIPOC critics labs and things, some of which I've taken part in as a sort of mentor or guest speaker. And that's really encouraging. But again, I think there has to be a place for these emerging critics to write, and to get paid for their writing too. It can't just be, I know that we've been talking about, the sort of class structure in the arts too. Like it can't just be for the wealthier people with inherited wealth or who've married somebody in a profession that you can, that can support your so-called, hobby doing this. I mean, it'd be great if more people just made a living doing this, but I don't know. I mean, is the whole idea of a professional critic, is that even relevant anymore, in the era of social media, like where everybody has a comment and there are influencers around and, I mean, there was a piece, a couple of weeks ago about movie studios giving precedence now to so-called influencers, covering films rather than traditional film critics. Because, many of them have massive followings. But they're not, so I mean, they're going to be, getting the word out about your film, but are they going to be putting that film into, some sort of context? Are they going to be critical about it too? I mean, that was, and that sort of thing does exist, I think, in theater criticism as well. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of, I won't name anybody, but there are some critics who are more, cheerleaders, or supporters, don't want to say anything critical about shows. And does that really help? Does that really help the ecosystem? Does that help people? I'm not implying that you have to be mean, but you can be critical and constructive. But just to sort of answer your question, I mean, there are a lot of, Aisling Murphy at Intermission, I think is so gifted, is so talented. Joshua Chong, who's my colleague at the Star, is really, really smart. Liam Donovan, is at Next Magazine. And I think he has his own, or he had his own sort of theater blog as well. And I think he's even in university. So, they're all like Gen Z and they're doing just incredible work. And, and a little bit older are people like Alana Lucas, who was at Mooney, as was, Ishvan Dugalin. He was at Mooney on theater as well. So, they're well trained, but I mean, I look at any of them and I would respect their work, and I'm always seeking them out. Cause I think the more viewpoints you have on a show, the better. And there's just sort of more dialogue.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The dialogue aspect is really important because it shouldn't just be one critic's opinion that rules the roost, for want of a better phrase. Because theater is a conversation, and there should be more opinions and discussions.
Yeah.
You're talking about the cheerleading reviewers, and I remember I was at a particular Fringe festival a number of years ago,
And I discovered that that's the way that all of the reviewers in that particular city wrote their reviews. And I have some really strong opinions about the cheerleading aspect of it. If you don't want to be actually critical, if you just want to say that everything is amazing, you do a disservice both to the audience and to the performer. Because when the audience goes to a show that has been raved about and it isn't really worthy of the raves, then they leave thinking, I guess I just don't understand theater.
Yeah.
Which is the thing that we are constantly trying to combat anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. And they're going to feel alienated. Like, oh, obviously I didn't feel that. So maybe theater isn't for me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, why not just not say anything if you didn't like it? And I've done that too.
Yeah.
Just, especially for a young company, that I just thought I may have just emailed them a few words, but I'm not going to go on record, and say it and, write things. Yeah. I mean, we might appear sort of mean and vicious, or whatever, but we do have hearts. I remember early on, coming to the conclusion that, I'm not going to say anything bad about young actors, for instance, like children, right? Like say 10 or so. I'm not even bad, but just overly critical. Unless they are like the star of the show, unless it's like an Annie or a Matilda or that sort of thing, I will just leave out saying something. Because, I think that could probably stay with that person for a long time, because they just don't have the defenses built up then and perspective on what they're doing. So, and so I've stayed with that for a while. And again, like young emerging companies, I would rather point out the things that work than the things that don't. I think that's probably the better way to go with them.
There's a sense, I think, sometimes between the performer and the critic, where there are some people who want to fight about their review if they didn't agree with it. And there are other people who, sort of, they just take it in and they say, okay, I guess we have differing opinions or things like that. But I think that we generally don't have like a dialogue between reviewer and artist. And maybe it's because of, sometimes an artist's feelings get hurt and they lash out. I think you got an email from somebody at some point that I think you talked about on Twitter about them talking about a harsh review or something. Do you think there is a space for like a friendly conversation between reviewer and critic, or is it better just to like take the review and just let it be what it is, and you accept that you have a differing opinion than the critic as the artist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always want to be formed if I got something wrong, like a spelling of a name or something, or even like a plot point or something. And so I'm happy when people sort of point that out. But yeah, I mean, it would be great if there could be some sort of dialogue. And I think that with social media, there can be more responses and things. There's always the comment section, which I think can be a great way to see different viewpoints. And to learn a lot too. But I think in this case, the one that I think I posted about it on my blog too. In this case, it was somebody who DM'd me or emailed me and just said that my writing was mean-spirited and that other people thought it was too, and that sort of got under my skin because I thought it made me question, am I mean-spirited? Because I remember the phrase that he was referring to. I remember taking a lot of time around that, just the wording of it. And, I remember thinking in the show a couple of times before, I mean, it wasn't just one instance of it.
Mhm.
But I thought, well, this person is an adult. They've done this. I think they've come back to theater recently.
Mm.
But I stand by this. I mean, with 25 years of seeing theater, I stand by what I wrote about it. And I
Mhm.
don't think that was mean spirited. Maybe I could have I could have added more context. But that may have even just sort of, brought more attention to the one line. And so it's going to be interesting because this person has a big show coming up in the fall. And so he also said something about, well, I feel like I can tell you this because you get free tickets. I didn't mention that. I didn't mention that in the post. So now I'm thinking, am I going to be invited to this?
Mhm.
And if I'm not, I can always just buy a ticket, because as a freelancer now, I can expense these things, right?
Right.
Uh, and what happens if, one of the papers, assigns me to review this? I don't know. I'm
Right.
going to have to think about this because it's going to be it's a pretty high profile show. And this person is involved. So yeah, but I mean, in 25 years, as that being one of the few times that that's happened, I find that really interesting,
I think that says a lot about you as a reviewer, to be
Mhm.
honest. Because I think that you are fair. And I think that anybody who has read your reviews over the years knows that you're not mean spirited. Um, just like, John Kaplan could be very, he could be blunt,
Yeah.
but he could also, he did it with love because he loved theater.
Yeah.
I remember he would occasionally, if you sent him a press release, and you'd made some errors, he'd be like, "Can I tell you about your press release?" He'd give you notes on your press release. He
That's
did
like
that to me a
John,
couple
yeah.
of times in the early days, and I was like, at first I was like, I don't know what this means, and it was just like he's just trying to help you. Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
Um, now, as we sort of sit at this time of the year, it's like the middle of August. The mad frenzy of the Toronto Fringe Festival. Summer Works has just ended. As we head into the fall, as things sort of ramp up for the fall, and we won't even talk about the madness that is November. What does this time of year look like for you as a reviewer? Is it calmer? Is it a space where you could sort of like take a bit of a breath before things really get too busy in the fall, or is it never ending for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be covering, because there are still some Stratford and Shaw openings, and I actually missed some of the early ones just because the season in Toronto was still going on in May. And also trying to get transportation to either of those places is always a challenge when you don't have a car. So I've been assigned to review some things at the Shaw, some things at Stratford. I think I'm going to be covering TIFF for one of the daily papers. But most theaters know to stay away from that first week after Labor Day, the first week and a half. But yeah, I mean, traditionally it has been a sort of quieter time. I've got a magazine piece that I've just been working on for weeks now, and I just want that to be over. It's theater related and it's fascinating. I mean, one of the great things about, I think about being a freelancer now is being able to choose what I write about. And I've had to turn some things down. I've just been so busy. But like at now, or if you're on staff somewhere, you can be pulled in so many different directions. First of all, you're editing, and I loved editing. That's really one of the things that I miss a lot. I loved working with writers. I loved assigning things to them, but also you're drawn in, or you're thrown into assignments that you might not necessarily want, like the reader's choice thing where you have to talk about the best masseur in Toronto or something. So you have to interview them, or the best yoga place or whatever. I mean, they're not huge assignments, but they still take up some bandwidth or whatever. So I kind of like no, I really like just being able to choose what I do write about. But I've also been thinking about, just looking at the season that's coming up, because one of the great things about, I've compiled this listing section on my site. So I sort of get to see all these things that are coming up, and you just sort of start thinking about ways that you can cover these shows in sort of more creative ways. So I like thinking in those terms, like if there are trends or whatever. But yeah, I mean, traditionally spring, sort of the June, early June, and sort of August, after summer works, and then right before Labor Day have traditionally been real dark periods for theaters. But I think a lot of smart theater companies or theater people have realized that too. And they've realized, oh, there are some empty theaters here. So maybe we can, put on a show. So.
Yeah, that's a fact for sure. Now with 25 years of reviewing theater in the Toronto sort of theater ecosystem, I wonder if you have thoughts about what makes the Toronto theater scene unique, what makes it vibrant. What is it? How do you see the Toronto theater scene when you look at it and looking back on it?
Wow, that's good. I thought of that, really. What makes it unique? I mean, I think the population of Toronto, the demographics of the city, and I think that one of the best things about the return after the pandemic has just been like a change in artistic leadership, and that's been reflected in the programming. We're talking, ethnic diversity, but also gender, and we just saw like a deaf-led production of the Scottish play. Just a lot more sensitivity about what kind of audiences we're making theater for. So, I would think that this is unique in the country, just because the other cities I don't think have as big, as great a diversity. The other thing too is just the other arts going on, and I think I love those. I love those collaborations, especially like with comedy and like with music, like some of the things that, that Chris Abraham was doing at Crow's Theater by bringing in, like indie rock musicians, putting on shows. And so sort of cross-pollinating these audiences, I think that is so cool. And I think it's a great way to ensure that, that both fields that both art forms, are exposed to different things. And just the comedy, I mean, having Second City here, having Bad Dog Theater here, and having, those people do theater, and TV and everything, I think just really makes the scene, just a lot more fun. Right. And, it just brings so much variety to it. So yeah, I'm so glad that we've got, that Toronto is, apart from the Just for Laughs Festival in Montreal, right. I think that Toronto really is the comedy hub. I mean, ultimately this is one of the saddest things I think in the country, is that we just don't have the infrastructure in comedy to support all of the talented comics who are here in the country. And most of them leave for New York or LA or even the UK too, where, there's a longer tradition. But man, I think the scene would be so much sadder without that element. So yeah, I don't know. And, and then having places like Stratford and Shaw too. And so people can get this training and then come back, or on the off season, they can do shows like in the Novembers or whatever. They will often do it, or no, I guess before November. No, after.
It depends.
November.
I think it depends, because I remember, the Rocky Horror ran
right?
well into November.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think January often you will see
Yeah.
a lot of the festival folks take a contract, which is great because often, people who don't go to those places don't get to see, these fantastic, artists.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's hard to get there without a car.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really wish that like the trains did a better job of getting these places. Especially since like traffic now too, you really like I'm going to, Niagara Lake on Thursday and it's just like, I'm leaving 4 hours before?
Yeah, you have to.
What is like basically, if everything's fine, it's basically like an hour and a half trip.
Yeah, but you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the
I
unknown.
remember the year that I did a show at the Hamilton Fringe Festival. I left. We were gonna have like hours. The idea was I was gonna have like 3-4 hours before I had to do a thing that evening. It was like their big kickoff. Well, it took so long for us to drive there that I arrived just as the thing was starting.
Oh,
so you can't. That stretch is pretty rough. So it would be great to have a train that took us there.
Yeah. I remember coming back when they had the Courthouse Theater at Niagara-on-the-Lake. I remember getting there right at 2:00 or whatever.
Oh.
And I had to pee like crazy. And I thought I could go into the theater or I could go to the washroom. And I thought, no, I have to go to the washroom.
Yeah.
I'm just going to burst. So I did. And I think I got in. I think they let me like in the back or something like that. But that was just the most painful.
Of course. Yeah. 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 No. It's it's great to have those places. They're very close as long as everything time wise gets you there.
Well, and there's so much more in the province too, right? Like, man, I wish I could go to all these places. And some people do. Like,
I know.
Lynn Slotkin goes all over the place. Christopher Hoyle goes all over the place. And I think, I'd love to have gone and see the Donnelly's trilogy up at the Blythe Festival. Cause I studied at a university and I've never seen a production. I've only read it. And I thought,
right.
But
you've got Blythe, you've got Prescott. There's so many little theaters all over this province that we don't even, because we're here and you need to travel to get to them. I think they're not on a lot of people's radars, but they do great work.
Yeah.
Well, Glenn, I want to thank you so much for giving me some of your Monday evening. I really appreciate the time, and thanks so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for asking me.
This has been an episode of Stageworthy. Stageworthy is produced, hosted, and edited by Phil Rickaby. That's me. If you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And remember, if you want to leave a tip, you'll find a link to the virtual tip jar in the show notes or on the website. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the complete archive of all episodes at stageworthy.ca. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. See you next week for another episode of Stageworthy.